Hello and welcome to Clarinet Ninja. Today, I am asking pretty much the easiest question I've ever asked myself. Is Anthony McGill great? Yes! A resounding yes as far as I'm concerned. If that answers the question, video over. Kidding. Let's dig into why Anthony McGill is great. That's an interesting and fun thing to dig into. I have this broken down in my head with three components that work together to make Anthony McGill great. The first component to consider in the greatness of any clarinet player is how do they play the clarinet? We need to have considerations involving tone, articulation, and technique. Now, there's subcategories of each one of these things. We're not going to go too deeply into that. That's an interesting topic for another day. Here's what I think. From a classical or orchestral standpoint, we need two things in our tone. We need it to be even throughout the registers, and we need it to be focused. Dark, bright, those are subjective choices. And I don't think that that's something that we can make a determining factor as to good or bad. We're going to be checking out, does Anthony McGill have an even sound? Is it focused all the way through? Yes. We're going to check it out. We're going to listen to it. And also, we're going to listen to some articulation. To say, when we think about articulation, oftentimes we think about speed as being the primary focus in that realm. And it's quite honestly not. It's an important thing, and it's an impressive thing. And I can tell you, Anthony McGill can articulate at whatever speed he feels like within human constraints. But that's not the kind of articulation we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about articulation as it pertains to making a quality sound in all the registers. Are we able to articulate and maintain our sound in those registers? Is it clean? Is it adding to the ability to make tone colors and phrases? One of the things that's important with our tone and our articulation, when we put an accent on a note, does our tone hold? To say, does it spread when we do that? At different volumes and different articulations, how does that all work together? And how is it that we can look at that and hear what is more of a nuanced version of what articulation is doing for our playing? And finally, we're going to look at technique. Our technique, again, is something that we tend to say, how fast can this person play? But again, that's not really what we're doing most of the time. We are playing things that are within a realm of ability level that a lot of people can achieve. It's the way that that goes about getting achieved. And again, my supposition here isn't that Anthony can't play anything. He can play anything. We're not going to listen to him play the Nielsen Concerto or the Hinastera. I've heard him do those things. Maybe not the Hinastera, but I have heard him play the Nielsen. It's great. But let's talk about technique as it pertains to playing light and smooth and even. Those are much more sort of daily things that apply to every piece that we play. And also how the technique works with having a very subdivided way of playing so that things fit in exactly right. And within that exactness, how do we make a phrase? How do we make it sound alive and free? And these are things that Anthony does about as well as I've ever heard anybody on any instrument. As a way of highlighting these things, we're going to use a recording that just came out in November 2022, on November 11th, called American Stories. And American Stories is an album that highlights and showcases composers that have been underrepresented. Included on this album are, of course, Anthony McGill on clarinet. The Pacifica Quartet is doing the quartet job of the clarinet quintet masterfully. We have compositions by Valerie Coleman, James Lee III, Ben Shirley, and Richard Daniel Poor. All of these pieces attempt very successfully to tell stories that could be very easily and very importantly considered American stories. And it's super interesting on that level and is an album that should be listened to and reflected upon and thought about in a way that a lot of classical albums don't invite us to do. And this album does it in a way that's important and valuable. And I've written an entire blog post about it. Put it on my website. I'm going to put that link in the description. This was a transformative experience for me to think about the topics brought up in this recording. And I am a better person for having thought about it and having listened to it. But we're not really talking about that part of this record today. We're talking about clarinet playing, because You tuned into Clarinet Ninja, and I'm glad you're here. So let's talk about the clarinet. We are going to focus today on James Lee III and this quintet that he wrote for clarinet and string quartet. We're going to listen to two movements, and we're going to listen to them through these different lenses. We're going to hear tone, articulation, technique. We're going to talk about how these pieces highlight these characteristics in Anthony's playing that are extraordinary. And the way he takes these things, which again, we have clarinet playing, we've got musicianship, and we've got artistry, and how these things work together to equal greatness. A lot of that is probably subjective, but I think that I can turn this into an objective conversation to talk about exactly what's happening, and that is great. Whether one prefers a different sound or a different style, or everyone's open for subjective choices. But this is great, and I want to share my ideas of what makes it great with you. Here we go. We're going to listen to James Lee III, Anthony McGill, Pacifica Quartet. And by the way, buy this record. It's on Sadie Records. I'm going to put that link in the description too. And please feel free to buy the recording directly from them. I think it's the best way to make sure that the people that put this great work into the world get compensated for it, because it wasn't free to do it. And I think we forget sometimes that we're used to consuming things for free, that this costs some money, and it's money well spent. So let's check out James Lee III. We're going to listen to the first movement of his quintet entitled Forgotten Emblems. We're going to listen to the opening real quick right now. So in just that opening statement of a theme, we hear dynamics, accents, phrasing that requires a holding of the sound within those accents. I don't know if they're written as sforzandos or just straight accents or how they are exactly marked, but I can tell you that it is an impressive way in which the sound remains focused during these moments, because these moments are what gives us the guideposts to understand the structure of the phrasing. And this is where all the artistry gets mixed in with the clarinet playing, gets mixed in with the musicianship to create the greatness, right? Because this is no shade on James Lee III or Anthony. This is not virtuosic. These are choices that somebody that plays the clarinet incredibly well, who is a great musician, who is a fascinating, interesting artist, will make, that makes this, which is something that a lot of people could play, great. And it's finding these differences that can inspire us to make these same kinds of things, because if we can hear it and we can listen to it and we can aspire to it, that's going to inform what it is that we think. Being able to recognize these things is really, really helpful. So let's also now check in on the beginning of the second movement. These are basically what we're going to be listening to, and some further spots in these movements. So let's listen to the second movement. This one is called Ashoa, I think. I'll put it up on the screen. I'm not sure how to say it. It's from a language that I don't speak. It does mean play somewhere. And this is functionally the scherzo movement of this work. Let's check it out. We're going to hear some good articulation throughout the different registers. Let's check it out. All right, so what I hear there is fantastic, clean, sparkling articulation in all the registers. What we heard was from a low A up to a high G. And the articulation style was the same in all those different registers. And as we know, the clarinet functions kind of like three different instruments in those registers. And to make it sound the same is a feat. And being able to articulate in that way so that the articulation remains the same in those different registers. That is great clarinet playing. It's nuanced in the sense that that's not the fastest I've ever heard anyone articulate. That's not the highest I've ever heard anyone articulate, but it is great all the way through. The integrity of how that works and how the articulation works with the sound, works with the articulation is unbelievable. It's really, really beautiful. To be able to articulate up into that high G and have it sound as effortless as it does, that's really the magic in all of this, that it doesn't sound hard. None of it sounds hard. And we're going to listen to some stuff that actually gets pretty hard. Let's turn back to the first movement, and we're going to listen to what is, I would consider, kind of a development section of this work, of this movement. And let's see what it calls upon the clarinetist to do. Let's see what Anthony does. All right, so we're gonna go back. We're gonna listen to that because there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, we have some genuinely altissimo notes there. They are filled with tension based on how they function, where they are on the instrument, how they function. But the sound stays really right in there. But also, we've got some moments where there's some genuine flexibility and an ability to bend the pitch without really losing the tone quality at all, and that is hard to do. When we tend to bend our notes down, our sound tends to spread out or do something different than it's already doing. But I don't hear a lot of that here. It's an incredible amount of control over the clarinet. Let's dig into some of this clarinet playing a little bit more. Let's hear that flexibility. Let's listen to it one more time. That is an incredible amount of control over the clarinet. That is great clarinet playing. I want to highlight what we have here in terms of the subdivisions and the ability to control our technique. There's flashes, there's flourishes, there's things that come up that this whole thing sounds somewhat improvised. And it sounds kind of tossed off in a way that sounds almost casual. And I guarantee this is not actually something that he did without practicing, right? Obviously, I mean, it's super clean. It's very purposefully played. Clearly, it was practiced, but it doesn't sound like this was practiced very seriously. It was, but it actually isn't, it's not presented that way. And that's actually one of the things that's always really amazed me about Anthony's playing, is that it sounds so conversational. This, to me, just sounds like a flamboyant dance that's happening, and it's really coming to life in a way that is spectacular to me. So let's check in a little bit on that, where these technical passages are fluid, they're smooth, they're light, they're even, and very, very well subdivided. Otherwise, there's no way these figures could come in and out the way that they are. And then on top of that, it sounds like he's making it up as he goes along. Brilliant. And we're hearing within that also the tone very much staying focused and true to what Anthony's tone sounds like in general. And that also really strikes me as an unbelievable component to how Anthony plays the clarinet. It's a real tribute to somebody who has spent a lot of time, who's really developed their ears. When I hear this sound, even in this context, which sounds nothing like the music that Harold Wright or Anthony Gigliotti would have played, I hear both of those influences. Some warmth, the right amount of brightness and ring. I wouldn't call it bright at all, but it's got all the overtones present. It has a warmth and a focus without sounding fuzzy or unfocused. I mean, a lot of times dark sounds get unfocused. Good stuff. Let's listen to it one more time with all that in mind. I'm going to let it play a little longer. So we hear how clean the technique is, how consistent the tone is, and it really comes through to enable him to make phrases. And even on this piece that really no one had heard before this record came out, I don't think, it's clear, like this is all kind of happening without functional harmony. I mean, this isn't atonal, but it also doesn't have a lot of leading tones in it. It's not going tension to release in a way that we normally hear. But boy, do I know where I am, because he is showing us everything that we need to know to see how this music is organized. And that is tremendous. It's being done at an extraordinary level here. Now, let's move on to the second movement, where we heard that scherzo passage. Let's listen to a little bit of it again, just to refresh our mind. All right, so there's our statement. I would say that's probably a complete statement of the first theme, if you want to be real square about it. But let's listen to how this gets developed and how it gets expanded. And it shows off more of the elegance of how Anthony can play the clarinet and can play this dance-like figure using this articulation, using the tone, using this incredibly subdivided, incredibly clean technique. Once again, this just sounds like, forgive me for saying this, but the clarinet might be too easy for him. Now, when I hear this, I am blown away by this one very, very weird thing when I don't have perfect pitch. And usually when I hear a clarinet player, I can hear the different registers pretty clearly. And so I can deduce what notes somebody is playing based on the actual tone color of their instrument. Now, when Anthony plays the clarinet, I can easily be fooled because the registers don't have the fundamental change in color that we all have to deal with. And that is a level of hearing on his part to be able to produce that. That is really extraordinary. And it's really enjoyable to hear him play this and have that component along with the incredibly clean articulation that is consistent throughout the registers, and then have this technique that is clean and light and clear to be able to go through all these different registers in a way that really does sound effortless. And where I really hear it is when the hemiola starts. If you don't know what a hemiola is, it's a 3 against 2. Let's listen to that part one more time, because that's where it's really important that everybody in the ensemble is taking responsibility for their own rhythm. And that's, I would say, tone and rhythm are the two most important parts about musicianship. Yeah, tone is maybe more instrumental, but you get the point that those two things work together, because those two things are always happening when we play. There's always rhythm, there's always tone. Let's hear how it goes. Okay, so that might not be a true hemiola if we're defining that by the actual definition of it. Maybe it is, but what it is a feeling where the time is shifting in a way that it hadn't before, and it's shifting the accents of what's underpinning this melody that happens over the top of it. And it takes a lot of strength and conviction of one's own playing in order to have it come out that smoothly. And that is great. That is great. Anthony is a great clarinet player. Anthony is a great musician. And beyond that, Anthony has an artistic intention that really shines through in all of the playing on this record. So thank you for listening to this and letting me share my very strong feelings about all of this. But even more than that, if you've made it this far, the thing I do want to share is that this record actually, all this aside, great music, great playing. The intent behind this record is something that is special, and it's something that Anthony has been promoting in his life, to ask hard questions about underrepresented communities in the world, in classical music, and really inviting people to think about themselves and the world we live in, and what steps can be taken, what can we learn. And this whole album is really an invitation, at least in my mind. I don't know what he says about it. I'm going to invite him to talk about it with me, but mostly about the clarinet. In any case, what is powerful to me about this is it's an invitation to consider the world around you and the history and your place in it. And that goes for people of color. And for me, that goes as a white person walking around the world. And not only that, a white man walking around the world, a white straight man walking around the world, to find a way to say, maybe everyone's American story isn't the same as mine. I know my challenges, but to really effectively get into the stories of other people, sometimes it takes us something a little bit more than just words. And all of the recordings here invite thought and consideration and evaluation of who we are as people and the world around us, and that all of our stories are different, they're all personal, and they're all important. I went about this more loquaciously in my blog post if you're interested in reading it. Again, that's in the description. Spend some money on this. Sadie Records, thank you for doing this. Anthony McGill, thank you. Pacifica Quartet, thank you. Valerie Coleman, James Lee III, whoop, good stuff. Ben Shirley, Richard Daniel Poor all contributed fantastic things to this record. Check it out. Anthony McGill is great by any metric. I'll fight you on that. All right. Thanks for stopping in. I'll see you next time on Clarinet Ninja.